Tynberg of the Palm Springs Public Library's Local History Project. I am here today with one of Palm Springs' best-known pioneers, Mrs. Patricia Moorten. When the Mortons settled in this community more than 45 years ago, they brought with them a true appreciation of the desert's natural treasures. We are in Morton's Botanical Gardens, much of which will be shown on the tape later on, and today's date is February 10th, 1987. Because we are sitting in this absolutely beautiful, wondrous setting, I'm thinking of your late husband, Mr. Chester Moorten, better known to the world really as Cactus Slim. And actually, that was your name, was it not?
Yes, I promoted that name for him.
What were his origins? Where was he from?
He was from the state of Washington, the tall timber country, and he learned as a child to love the forests and went fishing and trapping like the Indians, and lost his parents as a young boy, and so enjoyed nature especially. Worked for the Weyerhaeuser Timber Company.
Is this when he was known as Slivers?
Yes, his name was Slivers then.
I'm going to show this wonderful picture of Chester Moorten. Now this was before the Hollywood days.
Oh yes, he actually knew Alva Hicks, who eventually, of course, owned the water company here.
Right.
And the Edwards family, which were the close friends of the Hicks family, and they had told him about Palm Springs, even up in Washington, but he went from Washington to the movies. He went to Hollywood to become a character actor, dancer, and contortionist, and played with some of the most interesting actors and actresses in the last of the silents and the first of the talkies.
Well, he knew Howard Hughes.
Yes, he worked with him closely.
Of course, he worked with Max Sennett because he was one of the original Keystone
Cops, and with the comedy groups, often in comedies.
He was also known as the thinnest man in Hollywood.
Yeah,
was that your name too?
No,
you didn't know him then.
No, he was booked in the old magazines. His booking listed as the skinniest man. He was 93 pounds and 6'3".
Wow. That is good.
Right.
Wonderful looking man, really wonderful.
Thank you.
Now, I think a combination of the Depression and the vagaries of Hollywood and the allure of the desert and illness brought him to the desert.
He had often been on location in the desert with his movies works, and he saw the lure of it, and Hollywood was then feast or famine, and he got the idea to go out prospecting for gold and running a gold mine, and he left Hollywood, he escaped Hollywood.
Yes.
And found the desert very rewarding, very healthful, and built a gold mill to mill the ore from the mines, and operated the arrasters, which we still have on exhibit here, and panned for gold, of course, many places, and took people on desert trips prospecting.
In the late 30s, I believe, he settled in what is now Joshua National Monument.
Joshua Tree National Monument in the Cottonwood Springs area.
Right.
And the mill site is an historical landmark called Morton's Mill Site. Everybody can go and see it. And we have some of the relics on exhibit here. And he started raising desert plants at the same time.
Yes.
That was his first nursery, and went into the field of desert landscaping from that time on.
I read a quote from one of the LA Times sections that your husband called the cactus the highest form of plant. I guess
we did, yes.
You both did.
Yes.
Because it was so sturdy and
well, my
maintain water and so
my consensus of choosing cactus as my profession, they are the highest form. What I believe, because all vegetation depends on water, rainfall, to sustain themselves, and cacti can exist the longest of all vegetation without water. So that, to me, was decisive.
A noble plant.
Yes,
a noble
indeed.
plant, noble profession. Your background was somewhat different, I would say,
Quite.
than your husband's. You were born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland,
and
Ohio.
Your father was a publisher, is that?
He owned a publishing company of newspapers and books, and a very cultural city. We were
Yes.
exposed to many wonderful events, and it was a totally different aspect, but I chose nature as my field very young, and plants, and started my study in desert plants at the Cleveland Art Museum, studying the ancient plants of Egypt. And putting it all together, I decided our own desert was the challenge.
Was it true that you had collected cacti as a young girl?
Yes,
that
as
you,
a child.
in Cleveland, Ohio, in
Right.
the winters had had cactus in your windows and
It's true.
so forth.
Like so many do, start off that way.
That is wonderful. And bring us up to date as to your travels from Cleveland to Los Angeles. That's where your first stop was in
Oh, yes.
California.
I came to California by train alone as a teenager, and came to Los Angeles. Enjoyed the cultural activities of that region too. The libraries are marvelous. I studied both at UCLA and SC. I took just courses that I wanted to study. Nothing was specialized in the field of therapeutic research. So, of course, I spent weekends with my aunt and uncle lived in Los Angeles, and he was in real estate. And he said, "Where do you want to go?" The very first weekend that I was in California, we went to the desert. And actually, I loved it so much, and I spent as much time as I could actually in the field, exploring, photographing, and studying, and even serving apprenticeship in a botanical garden. And tried to just absorb as much as I possibly could. And in that way I had a chance to also help with the landscaping of the old Egyptian theater in Hollywood, which was all ancient Egyptian plants, which tied right together with my original study.
That is wonderful. You had, at this time then, you had an expertise in botany, horticulture, landscaping, the entire
Yes.
spectrum of
Studying it.
natural treasures.
Yes, and actual experience of exploring the desert too.
Was it in the nursery that you actually met
In the botanical garden.
Cactus Slim?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I had read the files in the office and realized he was a very interesting person with his interest in the plants and also in gemstones. He was hand cutting opals and gathering crystals and so forth, which was my second interest. And so when we were introduced, it was a natural.
Yes. You met and married about 1940.
That's right.
Is that right?
Well, we met in
You met in
before
the late
that.
30s, right?
We spent over a year getting the business organized here in Palm Springs. Slim had moved to Palm Springs from
Yes.
Cottonwood.
Explain what the business was. When you settled into Palm Springs, then you basically opened your own, I think of it as an art gallery, actually.
Well, it was a combination. It was
Yes.
one of the first art galleries. The Desert Inn also had an art gallery, but we exhibited some of the desert artists' work, and we also had the original museum. We called it Museo del Desierto in Spanish, meaning Museum of the Desert. It was cactus, rocks, and fossils, and just beautiful objects of the foliage and dried seed pods, everything, as well as the art gallery.
And this was located
Right where it is now, the boulevard from Indian Avenue towards the airport, between the Spa Hotel and the Marquis.
Yes.
Of course, at that time, there wasn't
There
any
was neither.
airport, and there wasn't anything else. There was the bathhouse to the north,
Right.
and the lot between the bathhouse and our museum was the hole in the ground, which was a swimming pool. It was dug with the plow that we still own.
In speaking about museums, the Palm Springs Desert Museum was really a fledgling organization at the time, and you obviously had lots of relationship and continue to be very active in the Desert Museum.
Oh yes, always.
And was Sam Hinton a particular friend?
Very close
of
friend.
yours at that time?
Oh yes, he was wonderful. As a matter of fact, that's when the Desert Museum had the, well, when they built the Wellwood Murray Memorial
Yes.
Library, there was a small room called the Children's Room, and that was where the Desert Museum started.
Yes.
And it was right across the street from our place. And we gave them the first exhibits of rocks and plants and seed pods and all kinds of things to get started on display. And when Sam Hinton was hired as their director, he came into town by bus and walked down Palm Canyon Drive, looked down the road, saw Museo del Desierto, and he said, "Oh, that's the museum." So when he walked in big as life, said, "I'm your new director." And I said, "Well, I
No,
think
you're
you're
not."
lost." And he became a very dear friend.
He was a young fellow, and he had
Oh,
a
yes.
wife and a baby, I understand.
That's right.
And he was also very musical.
Musical was special, yes. He
Yes.
added great dimension. And so then he went back across the street to the little children's room and the first museum there, and we've been friends always.
Yes.
But that's typical of our work with the museum. I served on the board of directors for many, many years and sponsored lots of their activities.
You and your husband were doing landscaping jobs, of course, at this time,
Oh, yes.
too, as well as collecting and educating and preserving and so forth. You did Smoke Tree Ranch, which I think is extremely a pure example of desert landscaping. and
Keeping it
architecture.
true desert is very important, and that's what we promoted always, so that people would use desert plants, learn to live with and enjoy the desert. And of course, we did a lot of the original promotion work for Palm Springs itself, before there was even a Chamber of Commerce or a convention bureau or anything else. We worked with the El Mirador Hotel.
I'm going to show this is one of the first early publications, magazines,
Palm Springs Pictorial.
the kinds of publications that were put out with desert beauty
Right.
on it and inside, that the Mortons certainly played a great part.
It goes
in.
back to the 30s.
Yes.
It's old.
This is
But we used paintings by desert artists to background our exhibits and window displays that we supplied and shipped all over the United States to travel bureaus and department stores, and worked through United Airlines, who were promoting the desert too. And that was where Palm Springs got to be known extensively.
I'm going to show a picture of a house that actually was built in '46. It's a famous architectural house in Palm Springs. Albert Frey and John Clark, the Raymond Loewy house, and we can see the desert landscape, which invades the house. Of course, it's
Oh, yes,
an inside
right
outside
inside.
experience, and
That was
This-
very typical of the contemporary design and then the true desert landscaping.
And down the street, we will show the Edgar Kaufman house that was built by Richard Neutra. The Mortons were featured in this issue of Popular Mechanics, and the house is eclipsed by the wonderful landscape, which is really the point. The wonderful cactus. Is there a story behind the cactus in front of the house?
Oh, indeed. That was a beautiful specimen of the Cirrus Weberi. It's bigger and better than ever now. And that is what I chose as the picture of a giant cactus to use for the cover of my own book on desert plants for desert gardens, landscaping.
We will discuss that book shortly. You've actually written other books as well.
I've written articles
Yes.
that are compiled into book form.
You worked with a lot of creative people,
Oh,
and
goodness,
we're
yes.
going to go a little bit beyond our limited time frame and then come back again to the war years. But I think we should mention that you've worked with Frank Lloyd Wright
That was a great honor.
and Walt Disney, and
Indeed.
you might tell the story of Disneyland.
Good. Well, Walt Disney lived here in Palm Springs, and we at Smoke Tree Ranch, and we did his original home landscaping there. Got to know him, and then he sold that home and built another one, and did his second home in landscaping. And then he was Grand Marshal of our Desert Circus Parade, and the theme was the Living Desert. Our float took the Sweepstakes Award and the Grand Trophy Award theme, and he came to us in presentation of the trophy and said, I know your work, and I have an idea for a little amusement park, and I want you to help me build the desert part of it. So he called us in on conference at the original office of Disneyland, which was in the Orange Grove, had been a packing shed where he built Disneyland. And from that time on, we worked with him in creating desert areas and other places too in Disneyland. So that has been a very special, great honor.
I would certainly think so, yes.
He was wonderful to work with, and all of his designers and engineers, who some of them have been our house guests, and we've taken them out in the desert to show them what we were reproducing and so forth. So that alone was highlighting
That's
our
a highlight,
profession.
yes. That would certainly be a highlight that's
Now my
will last
grandchildren,
forever. Absolutely, it's a legacy that will last
when my
forever.
grandchildren go to visit Disneyland, they say, well, my daddy and my granddaddy and grandmother helped build it. So
I
that's
think
nice too.
Just a wonderful,
We are
wonderful
still welcomed
experience.
at the gate as special guests at Disneyland.
That is a wonderful experience.
Yes.
This also was a wonderful experience. The Mortons were featured in National Geographic article actually in '57, and this is a picture of the Mortons packing a Joshua tree to send east to an exhibition.
Phipps Conservatory in
Pittsburgh. My goodness.
Pennsylvania, yes. We worked directly with them to create their desert region too. And being in National Geographic was again one of the most wonderful honors. We've been written up in so many publications, but this is the greatest. November '57, and it just seems like yesterday, but
well,
a lot of time has gone by.
You're local pioneers, but you really are international people.
Oh,
and I think
wonderful.
This is wonderful.
Well, that
proof.
told about a story about the desert itself, and telling that our work is worldwide. And that, of course, has always been our feature, that we are just headquarters here.
Let us go back to the war years when people were not spending money on landscaping and visiting botanical gardens. You still maintained a ranch, is that
yes.
right?
Always
to, of course, preserve and grow and collect your cactus.
From the beginning, we always had the ranch. Our first ranch in the north end of town was what had been originally the first golf course.
Yes.
Built by P.T. Stevens, and where the whitewater irrigation water came across the valley, and was level ground and plenty of water. It at that time was on the edge of town, and it was called Canebrake Road. It is now Vista Chino Road, a main road across our whole north end of the desert.
Yes.
And
of course, the history of Palm Springs is the history of our relationship with the water.
that's
as
true.
well. And,
the whole thing.
And so you were closely allied with
Well, we had to have a place where we had water growing the plants, of course. It couldn't, we couldn't put it just anywhere. And so then we found out, with the wind blowing all the time at the north end, and being so isolated, we kept losing a lot of our things at the ranch.
Oh dear.
Whether the wind blew it away or human element.
Yes.
And so, and the wildlife, the creatures were eating up a lot of it too. So we found in one of the Indian ranches, the Andreas Ranch, out in Palm Canyon region, and with irrigation water out of Andreas Canyon, so we moved the ranch up there, and we raised acreage of desert plants for desert landscaping, and stored some of our big boulders that we were using for waterfalls and so forth. And it was closer to town, we could watch it better. And so that's always been a part of our business, is raising and supplying plants.
Yeah, I think an interesting point that you've made is that this was the first golf course.
Yes.
In contradiction, I think, to what most people feel is it was O'Donnell.
O'Donnell,
was
no.
actually the first golf course, and this was this area.
Yes, I have a documented story on the golf course of the Culver Nichols' father-in-law,
Yes.
and Sally Nichols' father, of course. And that was used extensively, but it was became difficult to maintain it, and then O'Donnell was built, and that was different.
Yes. I think since we mentioned water, this might be a good time. This is a bit before the Mortons arrived, but this is the Great Flood of 27 and 28, and there are two. Do you know these bathers?
No. I did locate the photograph and had it enlarged. It shows typical bathing suit costumes swimming in Talkeet's River. And they put rock dams across regions of the river and made regular swimming pools.
This is certainly commune with nature here.
I used to write a daily, a weekly column in a newspaper, and dig up some of the old history and tell the stories of such as that, and I'd find the old photographs and incorporate them into the stories.
Invaluable. It's a wonderful picture. We've heard stories about the floods, but to see it is extremely important.
Yes. Water, of course, was the main thing here when Judge McCallum settled here and used the irrigation water out of the canyons. Then the great drought, of course, there wasn't even any water draining out of the canyons, so that's what collapsed the whole area for many years. That was around the turn of the century, of course, but then that was again like the collapse of the area. When war was declared, that made a big difference too. Everybody went home.
When war was declared, also you bought a floral shop.
That's right.
You're one of your first interests in loves, and of course related to everything else you were doing. I think it's interesting that we know that there were two Japanese families who owned floral shops in this community, and of course their lives were in danger.
Right. With the occasion of Pearl Harbor, they were closed up overnight, put on house arrest for their own protection. They were wonderful people, but they had, of course, the hysteria of war being declared. So we realized that there were no florist shops in town, and I had complete floral training also, along with my other studies, and so we bought the one florist shop and opened up, because our own shipping business and any of that type of our display business was also stopped overnight. And so we, during the war, had the Cactus Flower Shop, is what we called it. And we...
and where was this located?
Well, we moved from Indian Avenue up onto Palm Canyon Drive, across from the old Palm Springs Hotel, right in the 200 block north. And we're right in the center of the downtown activity. And we also had, then the war brought a lot of people here with General Patton training the troops, and the El Mirador is made into the Attorney General Hospital. And of course there were still some celebrities coming to town or living here, vacation. And so it was very interesting. We dealt with the servicemen, and had shipping orders of the little box cactus assortments and shipping out the desert, and beautiful rocks and crystals and lots of desert lore, besides the floral service. And we were on duty practically 24 hours a day for weddings because, of course, they were shipping out on immediate notice.
Yes.
And for the hospital, Attorney General Hospital, we supplied that with flowers. And it was another great challenge. And
which you met admirably.
keeping the ranch going, of course, raising more plants and hoping it would soon be over. And when it was over, of course, we sold the florist shop again and went back to our original idea of sharing our knowledge of the desert and building a real display garden, the botanical garden.
Yes. We will discuss the present location shortly, and as you mentioned, your inspiration behind all of this was maintained throughout to preserve, collect, and educate and beautify, and that's what
preservation and
continue to do.
Conservation. Conservation
yes,
always very important.
Yes, but you had other interests as well. You were very involved in all of the city activities. I will just pick out a few. I think that the PTA, now you have a son, and we will talk to Clark hopefully very soon. You got involved, as you did with everything, with his education, and basically you brought the idea of the PTA to this community.
The first PTA, yes. When we were the parent group at Kauai School, there was a need for the PTA organization then, and we went through all the correspondence and routine and established PTA in Palm Springs. It was very good. Of course, the other schools picked it up then. Good liaison with the parents and teachers. Of course, we were very interested in educational activities throughout the whole school system. My mother had been an educator, a teacher first, and then a principal of a school, and most of my family were educators. And so I was setting up a course of study, a curriculum in the schools for nature study, because nothing was being taught. Then I realized that the teachers weren't taught in the field, and so I set up a course of study for the teachers through San Diego State and taught it right here at my home in the garden.
Excellent.
And they still, of course, use that in their desert lore curriculum. And oh goodness, yes, I loved the process of education to children and the fun of growing up when the town was a small town and everything was horseback and bicycles and quite different.
You were a founding member of the Palm Springs Historical Society.
Oh yes.
And
I was a founding member on the board and Indian lore chairman to enhance the study of the Indian lore here too.
Yes, we will show a picture.
Yes.
Slim was particularly close with the Indians, and he had a rapport. This is a picture of Pedro Chino, whose name is very familiar to this community.
He lived to be 126 years old.
My goodness.
And when Slim knew him, he said he didn't like all the tin can tourists. I mean, Pedro Chino said that.
Yes.
And so it was interesting. I never did meet him personally, but I did a lot of research on his background here as the chief of the tribe of this region. That's for whom the Chino Canyon is named, and many other things too here.
You've served on the Commission for Parks and Recreation.
Yes.
As would be absolutely appropriate.
Yes.
And you also been involved in the Desert Circus, not only building floats, but the Hat Parade.
Oh yes, Hat Parade chairman many years, and it was always a wonderful event, and we really built it up to be one of the biggest events of the whole desert region. Desert Circus many years ago was mostly for the townspeople's celebration at the end of the season, but it became a very glamorous event, second only the parade, second only to the Rose Parade in California.
Oh, yes.
And we've built floats and won many awards, and we still are. We've been involved in every one of the desert circuses. Of course, the stage plays too.
Yes.
We all performed in that, the Insanities and Vanities.
Love costumes.
Oh yes, created lots of the costumes. And all of three of us, Slim, myself, and our son, have appeared in the events too. So that was just part of the wonderful memories of Palm Springs.
Yes. You mentioned a plan for a city park, a civic park, cactus park, and that never reached
That's
fruition.
right. We had always had a hope to design and create a botanical garden, knowing the great need for it here, and we did design one for what was then called the North End Park, which became Tamarisk Park and renamed Ruth Hardy Park, which it is today. At that time also the Desert Museum was the new Desert Museum was supposed to be built there at the park. So we went ahead and designed the botanical garden, spent years, 2 or 3 years, full time work on it, had it all ready to go, and the city fathers decided they didn't want to have the expense of maintaining it. So we turned right around and built the botanical garden here at our own place.
I think before we discuss the present situation, maybe we'll take a break and hopefully bring Clark in, who certainly is part of the history of Palm Springs.
Wonderful. Just the two of us.
Certainly, yes. We'll just be very casual here and talk about the early days when this is Clark Moorten, who is carrying on the legacy of the Moortens and their interest in desert lore and desert plants. I'm holding a picture of I don't know how young you would be here.
Yeah, I believe that was high school.
When actually the present situation, which we'll talk about later, was founded. But here is Clark with his mother and his father. And this is Clark today, who is carrying on the family tradition. We were talking about the early days when your mother was so involved in the PTA, not only involved, but she brought the PTA to this community. Do you remember the early years at Kauai School? Did you go to school with a lot of the local pioneers, children?
Oh, certainly.
And Indians, I
certainly
imagine.
Yeah, a lot of the local Indians and I all went to school together. I used to play with the Andreas kids. Kauai was great then. You know, I suppose it's still great, but you know.
Well, I think your mother started a tradition there of parental involvement that has carried on.
Oh yeah, it's terrific. The PTO organization that's there now that has come out of all that is doing a terrific job.
Your mother talked about your birthday parties, and she created wonderful scenes, as she has with everything else that's been done. Do you recall your birthday parties?
Oh yeah,
in the gardens.
I had so many neat parties. 7 years old, I had the 7 Seas party. Had a cake that was built like a ship. In 1949 we had the 49er Gold Rush party, and
probably
they hid all fool's gold out in a vacant lot, but we all went hunting for gold. And had some great parties.
What were the kinds of things that you did for recreation growing up here?
Well, I don't know.
This was before TV, really.
Yeah, well, I had kind of a unique situation. You know, I grew up in the midst of all of this, you know, with a lot of plants and fossils and a lot of things of nature, which also we did a lot of traveling. I traveled a lot with my parents, and you know, I didn't really think that was, you know, too unusual. I mean, being a child, you think, well, everybody must do that. So.
This would bring up the summers. Any particularly memorable travels during the summers?
Well,
you would travel north. You go to Oregon and
Washington.
Sure. Well, you know, any place that it was places of nature were interesting. I think probably the fondest memories were first trips into Baja in 49, 50, 51, and then trips into Mexico. Those were great.
And around the U.S.
And around the U.S.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you actually go on digs with your parents?
Oh, everywhere.
Yes.
Everywhere. I was always there.
Well, you enjoyed Washington, D.C. and Florida and New York.
Oh, I enjoyed every place.
When did you decide to actually be in the business? Or was it
Well,
a known quantity?
no, actually, you know, and I suppose every young person goes through this. It's in a family business. You know, I mean, I grew up in the midst of it. I was born in the midst of it. I lived it and breathed it and couldn't wait to get away from it.
Yes.
And,
Absolutely.
and for a lot of years, I was away from it and involved in many types of businesses. But when my father's health was deteriorating and when he passed away, why then I came back into it full time and having the best time of my life.
Your children, are they captivated by this? Do they realize it is so
Oh yeah,
special?
they realize it. They, of course, they're kids and they right now have other interests that kids have. So I think that in time they will, you know, want to take up where I am.
Do you have memories of some of the interesting key people who made up this community? For example, the White. Would you remember the White sisters, or were they not around?
Oh, no.
when-
No.
But Carl Licken was around.
Oh yeah,
yes.
I remember Carl Licken,
Yes.
very definitely.
Pearl, Auntie Pearl.
Oh yeah, Annie
I
Pearl.
know I would like to ask Pat about her relationship with Annie Pearl. I know it was particularly special, and
We were very close.
Yes.
We had good rapport. And Clark was awarded the Pearl McManus Scholarship at Palm Valley School, and that was nice too.
Yes.
She presented personally. And Pearl and I were both served on boards of directors of the museum and had much same interests. And of course she didn't drive, and she enjoyed going places, and so did I, so we traveled a bit together too.
Yes, you knew the White sisters, though. You knew Cornelia White, and were you the one who coined the names for the three
We had
sisters?
our pet names for them.
Yes.
One, of course, Miss Cornelia always wore jodhpurs,
Yes.
so we called her the Pants.
Yeah.
And her sister wore a derby hat, so we called her the Hat. And the other sister who carried a big bag, the Dr.
Farilla?
Farilla
Yes.
White. And she carried a big bag, so we called her the Bag.
The bag.
But those were our own pet names. She was, Miss Cornelia was our neighbor when we first came to
Yes.
town, and she was
Yes.
adorable. Of course, you have many stories on Miss Cornelia and her sisters, and she was really the pioneer here. And so it was a great honor to know her.
We do have stories about the White sisters, but Auntie Pearl is somewhat of an enigma. A lot of people have not talked about her, and you had a particular relationship with her, and in fact you did help Catherine Ainsworth with her,
a great,
the book.
many stories to share with Catherine when she wrote the book on the McCallum saga. Having known the family directly, and having saved some of the real relics, like the old wagon that they used to use, and especially the plow, the 1850 John Deere plow, which we have on exhibit here in the garden.
Yes. Is this the wagon? And I will.
The wagon is on display here now in the Botanical Garden, and we saved it from falling apart. That tells the story, and Auntie Pearl gave me the painting, which is the cover and frontispiece of the book, the McCallum Saga, which is the first recorded painting in the Palm Springs area of the old adobe, their home, the McCallum home.
And who painted that?
I can't remember, or it isn't legible. Or
it is not legible. I've looked at, tried to look at the signature.
The Oasis.
Yes. Yeah.
They painted it.
Yes.
And that's about the turn of the century.
Let's talk about the present garden, and we will be taking a tour later. It was originally the Willard Estate.
Yes.
And it was built in 1913?
The Willards came to Palm Springs in 1913. And they had their first home right downtown in the village, which was a smaller house, of course, and just the 300 blocks south. So it was right on Indian Avenue.
Yes, you remember
everything was 2 blocks at that time.
You remember the numbers as well.
And then they came out of town on the horse trail to the canyons and found this little mountaintop that perched above town and designed a Mediterranean design hacienda so that they could build it earthquake-proof, tied into the mountaintop, so it would be a solid construction. The Willards had traveled extensively, and Steve knew of the great earthquake possibilities here and had seen earthquake destruction and devastation in many places. So he decided when he built his home it would be earthquake-proof. And so his design, and then Alva Hicks was the contractor. And it took a long time to build it.
It was very far-sighted at the time.
It's steel reinforced every 6 inches, double-crossed.
Since Clark is still sitting here, I think the other earthquake, other than this past July, that people remember was, I believe it was 48 or 49. And someone mentioned that as a young child he was in the Plaza Theater, the movie theater. I think it was on a Saturday.
I was at home, and I can still remember well, I don't really remember it shaking. I remember it was very terrifying.
Yes.
I remember looking up and seeing the dust from rocks sliding down the mountain, and my mother and a couple of the other parents in the neighborhood got all the kids out in the middle of the street, and we all played Ring Around the Rosie.
Hanging arms, hanging together. We were having a story hour. That late afternoon, I used to have story hour.
Yeah, it was about 3:30 in the afternoon, I believe.
Yes.
And then
someone was in the theater when he shouldn't have been.
No, Clark was about 6.
Yes.
And we had the whole neighborhood gang in there. So we all got out in the middle of the street and got the little old lady across the road too. She was stuck in the house because the door jammed.
Oh dear.
Don't go. And it was quite an experience. Of course, we looked to the north, and the dust cloud from the hills, Desert Hot Springs, on the fault, just like an atomic mushroom, the dust.
Would you say it was more violent, excessive than the one in July?
I don't remember what it was.
I don't think they scaled it. There are no numbers.
I don't remember, but it went on and on and on, and the aftershocks too. And it did great damage. The rocks rolled through the tennis club, and every plate glass window in town was broken. Slim was downtown. He was doing a window display.
The Western Union office.
God.
Western Union, Santa Fe office. Well, whatever. A desert display, and the plate glass buckled out where he was doing the window display, and he watched the rocks fall off the mountain from downtown. So it really was an occasion.
Yes, I can imagine. I think we'll take a break because the Moortens have visitors. We're talking about the Willard Estate, which is the present home and gardens which you built. But he had sold it, is that correct?
Well,
when you drove by and...
Well, I saw it was for sale.
Yes.
It seemed ideal. We had looked everywhere for the garden to create it the way we really wanted it. And going out to the ranch one day, I drove by with a little for sale sign on it. So I went and got Slim and said, we're going to buy it. Well, I did not know that it had been subdivided. The whole estate was subdivided into 8 parcels. And of course we wanted as much of it as possible. So we did buy back 6 parcels is what we could anyhow, in order to create the garden as it is today. Actually, it was open desert practically, surrounding the home on a little hilltop. And we had our ideas of the design, and so it took a lot of legal action to do it, but that was our determination, and we did put it back together and created the garden.
Well, the whole estate has so many wonderful artifacts. Part of the wall is the first hotel in Palm Springs.
The wall
is a
around
section of
Dr. Wellwood Murray's hotel.
Wellwood Murray's hotel.
Yes, and when they tore that all down, we saved a portion of the wall and recreated it here in the garden.
We talked about the wine press, and there are lots of mine artifacts here, and it's a beautiful setting, and we will see it shortly.
Declared a historical landmark.
Yes, yes.
The home in honor of the Willards, and the whole garden as a historical landmark.
We should talk too about this magnificent garden and the fact that many people have been married here.
Yes.
There have been not only parties and receptions, and of course the Pioneer Picnic used to be held here.
Oh, for many years.
But people have held their weddings here.
We've been having weddings here, hundreds of them, for over 30 years. And many townspeople, and even second generation weddings, and many people from other parts of the world. So we designed the Oasis area especially for that, with the creation of Little Talkeet's Falls, and the Palm Grove Oasis features our native fan palms, and what used to be a sandy hillside is now a delightful area for just such as weddings and receptions and concerts and fashion shows and art exhibits. We've always featured artists wherever we've been.
Yes, it's all related, absolutely. Let us talk a little bit about the present. You are still extremely active, and you were saying that you are still lecturing on the history of the Palm Springs rose. What is the history, briefly, of the Palm Springs rose?
Yes, I just compiled a lecture on the history of it for the Desert Rose Society, which is newly formed here. About 20 some years ago, Rose Company owner was directed to me to bring her idea of this beautiful rose she had hybridized, which was a magnificent multicolor of the desert sunrises and sunsets. She wanted to have advice on it, and we decided to call it the Palm Springs Rose, the rose named Palm Springs. And I had it declared as the official flower of the city, and I took over. She was ill and needed a great deal of help in it, and I had the great pleasure of planting a rose garden at City Hall, and then presenting the roses to dignitaries from all over the world. I took rose bushes up to Victoria, British Columbia, our sister city, and we planted 200 bushes there on Pandora Green. And I was official welcomer and presenter for the city of Palm Springs, and whoever special would arrive in town or a big event, I would make presentation bouquets of the rose and present them.
Does it grow well?
It is a magnificent multicolored floribunda, and we have just reconstructed the rose garden and what's left of them at the City Hall as a gift to the city to refurbish them.
Wonderful.
And we, as a product of our Morton Botanical Garden, the rose has represented the beauty of Palm Springs and the desert everywhere.
Can one purchase the bulbs? And
we are getting it back on the market now. It got completely, it was a patent rose, and after the patent ran out, it was not available. But now I've taken charge again.
Well, that is wonderful. I will certainly have to look at the rose garden, and we'll see them shortly. You are an explorer, and you have identified species that were heretofore unidentifiable, and you have published many articles and written books, and the most recent we did mention Desert Plants for Desert Gardens.
Yes, that's my book of identification.
That can be gotten at the Palm Springs Desert Museum, for example, or can it?
No, it sold out 3 issues of it. I'm coming out with a bigger, better book. It is still in the libraries.
Yes.
The desert libraries and the College of the Desert. It's used in their study of ornamental horticulture there. But yes, of course, I've appeared on television and radio, and love to share the knowledge of the desert and to encourage people to learn to live with the beauty of the desert.
You also mentioned your Australian project that
goodness, yes.
is
That's the newest part of our garden.
I would like to
we have,
perhaps end on that. I think
right,
that's
fine.
exciting.
We have now going from the Palm Grove Oasis through a memorial garden, which we call our Oriental Meditation Corner, featuring the cycads and rare palms. We go from there into the newest part, the design of an Australian desert garden. There we have established the eucalyptus and some of the other Australian plants, and we are in liaison with the big new botanical garden in the center of Australia at Alice Springs. And they, the directors of that botanical garden have been here. We've shared seeds from our own trees and shrubs and cacti and so forth for their garden.
Must be fun.
Oh, it is.
Really
it's thrilling.
fun
and we've had the Consul General and his wife from Australia here to visit, and he highly approves of what we're doing too.
Well, it's educational again, and certainly is.
And it shows again
shows you how small the world is.
Yes, and identification of the plants that we can use in our desert gardens.
I think that's very exciting.
And the most important thing, although we've been a part of the historical background and the whole thing, which has been wonderful, we still look to the future.
You absolutely do.
Newest,
it has been,
newer projects.
It has been a pleasure. I've learned so much.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure and honor to be incorporated in your project.
And we do appreciate spending time with you. We will look through the garden, which is
beautiful.
Extremely important. And you have mentioned a word, and it's xerophetic.
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 Yes.
And
that's the basis of my own research, my work. I'm a research botanist in xerophetic plants. That means drought-resistant plants of the world.
I see.
It's becoming used more often now because the idea of water conservation is becoming better known and better educated. But I've always used it in my work, and I love to teach people. Plaque dedicating the garden as a historical landmark, presented by the Palm Springs Historical Society in 1965. And we are now in our 50th year in the profession. The garden was officially established in 1938. Always have birds. Should toss out food to put down a lot of birds.
Are you ready to go out?
Of the tour through the garden. It is our first California, which is now Baja California, Mexico, a most unique part of our deserts, where we've done a lot of our research and traveling, and unique plants from the Sonoran Desert region. In a corner, we're featuring the saguaros and plants native to the great state, our neighbor. There's purple prickly here. California region of the garden, and it features the Joshua trees in the high desert and many of the trees, shrubs, cacti, other succulents, century plants, ocotillos, of course the creosote shrub, hummingbird bush, and the tallest yucca baccata in the world with the Spanish bayonet yucca type. There's a lot of Indian lore here too. We show
It's nice back in a rock. All the time. We want it to look natural. You really don't know where you are when you're back here.
It used to be a very quiet district of Mexico. A combination of many of the so-called century plants, including the tequila plant, and many prickly pear species. Great feeling of walking through the central part of our neighbor to the south. This is where Ripley's Believe It or Not came and did a sequence for their TV show. Hillside, featuring the golden barrel cactus of Mexico and also the golden edged agaves or century plants and the golden flowered cavitia native to Mexico, the shrub. The garden shows some of the interesting wood forms and dried foliage and so forth that we use in decorative material. And it also shows a corner of the African garden with a little baby giraffe nibbling on the giraffe tree or the acacia. Garden, which is a beginning of our nursery. We raise plants all the way from seedlings up to giants, and we can supply several thousand different species for any need, interior decor or landscaping, or we can pack them up and ship them out. We have quite a variety so that you can make a selection. This corner has to be redone.
It's cut back time, genuinely.
Well, we cut here at fun, I think, to get lining rods. Can't please them all. Never. The South American region with some of the night blooming cirrus, and the mink tail, fuzzy white spine ones, and climbing cactus. A great many plants representing all of the countries of South America, including Argentina, Peru, Chile, Ecuador, even the Galapagos Islands. Found as many as 200.